Welcome back to another episode of I'm a Software Engineer. What next? Thanks for joining me again, Matt.
Great to be here again, James. It seems like we've done a few episodes recently, and I'm
Still haven't
still
moved.
at this point still haven't moved, but hopefully that'll happen today.
Well, good luck with all that.
Yeah.
I'm going to get straight into it. Today on the show, we're speaking with Richard Bown. Richard is a DevOps and platform engineer, leading with more than 30 years of experience across telecom, banking, insurance, and large-scale enterprise systems. He's moved between IC and leadership roles throughout his career, and he's now the author of Human Software, a book that explores the human side of engineering work, the relationships, the listening, and the leadership that actually makes organizations function. We're going to dig into his career signals, humane engineering practice, and what the future of engineering looks like in an AI-shaped world. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, James. Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for joining us. So, Richard, I'm really looking forward to hearing about the story that led you to write this book, because it's unusual in many ways compared to most tech books, in that it's a novel rather than a kind of a non-fiction readout. And it's a great little segue into my favorite question that we ask everyone that comes on the podcast, which is, imagine you had a magic telephone that you could pick up and you could call yourself 25 years ago. What advice would you give to yourself that you've learned over the last 25, 30 years of working that you think would be super interesting?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Yeah, well, it's a long time ago for me, 25 years ago. Well, 25 years ago for anyone, right? For me, it's got to be about staying a bit humble, right? Because I think when we're young, or when I was young, when I first came out of university, I was a hotshot engineer. Basically, I felt really excited to have a job. I had like a business card, like printed in the mid-90s with software designer written on it. I was so excited, right? I landed my first job and I just worked the whole time, and I hung out with, despite what I told myself, I actually lived with people I worked with as well. So I kind of like was living in a shared house. So like I couldn't escape work essentially. Plus I was on call. So basically, within a year and a half, I burnt out completely. I also took on an open source project, in the really early days. I burnt out completely, like badly, I reckon. I didn't go to the doctor about it, but I was like really struggling. Panic attacks, I just couldn't breathe, that kind of stuff, seriously.
Oh,
Because I just loved
yeah, well,
what I was doing so much. So a couple of things, I think. Firstly, stay humble, like just kind of listen to the people around you. And secondly, just take a step back sometimes and just don't take it all on yourself. So yeah, I got a real rough introduction to software engineering, but somehow I stuck with it and stayed here, and I still am here. So yeah, really good question. Thank you for that.
and I'm keen to hear how that's ended up being put into the book. But before we get to that, who are you? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I'm a UK resident. I'm a UK passport holder. I live in the Netherlands, have done for almost 20 years now. I'm just actually converting into becoming proper Dutch citizen as well in the next 6 months or so, I hope. I've been working in software engineering since I left uni. So yeah, since that first job, I've been going through a variety of roles. I did a lot of software dev to begin with in C and C++. Then I moved into more admin, Unix, and then Linux, and then lots of stuff, back end, front, you name it, basically. Also open source. I worked on an open source music software project for quite a long time in the late 90s, early 2000s. I did some writing for a couple of Linux mags back in the day as well. So yeah, and then in my career, I've just jumped around lots of different jobs. I jumped around in the UK. I've lived in London for a while. I moved to the West Country, and then I ended up over here. And over here, I was doing, working for banks essentially, doing back-end, data warehousing, that kind of stuff, and essentially moving up. I started doing some PO roles, some project management roles. I got quite excited about agile quite a while ago. I think as lots of us did, and eventually I found myself in a position where I could coach, mentor, and then lead essentially. So then I kind of went into management. And realized, it was about 5 or so years ago, I realized quite quickly that management I wasn't best prepared for management, and then stepped back again into an IC role. And now I'm a DevOps engineer.
What was it that made you think that maybe management wasn't for you?
So I kind of put it on a pedestal, right? I kind of like through my career, I was looking at the people I work with, especially good managers, and I was like, it's great how they do it. It's great how they link it up. I love the fact that they give us space to be able to do our work as in a team or as a team lead. That's great. And you see, I was lucky to have a couple of really great managers, and you see how they work, and you think, yeah, that's brilliant. I want to be able to do that, So I think it was a case of I was looking ahead, but I couldn't find the right position or the right role maybe. And also it's very competitive out there as well. There's lots of engineers out there. I mean, especially these days, right? And it's difficult to get to that position sometimes. So eventually something came up and I moved into it. But I kind of didn't prepare myself. I knew what I knew. Being a techie, I knew what I had my experience as well, but I didn't really think about the impact or lack of impact I could have. And I think it was the lack of impact I struggled with. When you got into that middle manager position, basically, you just basically, you're stuck doing a lot of stuff you didn't really imagine you would be doing. So yeah, I was naive, I think, going into that around in my late 40s. I was very naive. And yeah, I could think that really kind of bit me. So I could have prepared myself better. Yeah, I felt that I kind of, then I was stuck between two places. I wasn't really technical enough to be able to help out with the technical side because I divorced myself so much from that over the intervening previous years. And also I wasn't really able to think like a manager or a leader in an organization.
It's very common for our guests to find themselves in the same situation. We've had quite a few guests that have gone from IC to management back to IC. If you're an IC and you're enjoying it and you think that is the only way you can progress, perhaps, to be, whether it be paid more or feel like you're going higher, what advice do you have for those engineers that may be thinking that they should go into management? Like, do you think you need to stop yourself first and say, well, what else could I be doing that's not management?
It really depends on your track, I guess, where you come from, your background. For me, I was always quite a creative software engineer. So I like to come up with innovative solutions. And I think if you're being really bluntly honest, if you're creative, then it's probably not, management's probably not for you. If you're super creative, which I guess I am, then it's probably not for you. Yeah, it is a bit, because
why is that?
You can't express yourself. You can't express your creativity often with those roles. That's what I've found. You have to be much more structured, much more aligned with the corporate vision or the company visions have to be corporate, right? You have to be able to handle hierarchy well. But I'm ticking these things off in my mind. I'm thinking, no, it's not me. Basically, all these things. I like to jump to solutions, which I'm guilty of, right? But then I stop myself and I come back and I think, right, okay, don't jump to solution. Let's think about the problem properly. So I think it from a very engineering point of view, right? But when you think about an organization like that, that doesn't work. You can't apply that same thinking to an organization. You've got to fit in that structure to a certain extent. And that for me is a reason that I think that it didn't work out for me. Maybe there's the right org, but I think for anyone going to that now, you've got to look at yourself a little bit and say, how does the organization suit me and how can I fit that, right? I didn't do enough of that research before I accepted that role, I think.
I think the takeaway advice here for anyone really is that, and the thing that I don't tell you in individual contributor school when you're ready to graduate, such as it is that, and we've said this, I think this is our 20th episode, I think, James. I think we've said this 19 times. I think we've said this 19 times that management is not a promotion, it's a career change. Right.
Yeah.
And so they don't tell you that. And so a lot of new managers that I've coached along the way have been very surprised by that. They think that because they're a good IC, they're going to be a good manager, and it's not the case at all. The other thing, just like a personal reflection on it as well, is that I was being intentionally, reacting to the non-creative thing. There's definitely an element of that. There's no doubt, right? There's a bunch of management that's real drudge work. But what you have to do to be successful at it is you've got to hack yourself. As someone who was a reasonably good software engineer, and you get that endorphin rush from making something. And Kate, our guest last night, mentioned this exact thing. She said when she wasn't a software engineer, she came to software engineering late through a boot camp, and she got the buzz of making stuff and that sort of endorphin rush. When you get green tests, it's kind of thing. She was talking about that. And when you go from IC to manager, you lose that direct feedback for your creative nourishment. You lose it. And so what you have to do to have any tenure is you've got to be able to hack yourself to get that creative nourishment by proxy, not directly from your own outputs. And I've seen a few new managers from ICs fail in that because they just want to get their hands on stuff and they want to get that endorphin rush. So, but yeah, there's a lot of management work that's pretty drudge inducing. Unfortunately, I definitely agree.
Yeah, and I would add to that, maybe it's the alignment as well that you have with your boss. I mean, as an IC, the relationship with your boss is important, but as a manager, it's much more important, right? You've got to be pretty close, I would say. and you've got to be aligned certainly in the way that you work. If you're able to have some content which you can deliver, even though it is different, right? You've got to feel that there is some progress somewhere happening.
And I'd argue that one of the things is probably we can connect this to your journey. One of the things you can do when you get into management and leadership is you can start to write stuff down, and you can add writing as a new comms channel that you can use to communicate with people both inside and outside your organization. And I know I did that, and I know a bunch of people I know who've done that as well. And it's it has multiple benefits. So, a good segue. How on earth did you end up writing a novel about human software?
So yeah, well, I guess it's directly related to that stint as a manager. So I stopped doing that. I took a bit of time to think about what I wanted to do next, and during that time, I started reading again. So when I was a young engineer, I read a few books. I had to read stuff to learn about the software I needed to create. Right. So back in the day, it was like it was Björn Strustrup and I still can't pronounce his name and all that stuff. It was like yeah. Okay, thank you. And Korba, do you remember Korba? Are you old enough to remember that?
Oh gosh, you and I must be very close to the same age. Yeah, I was Iona. Do you remember Iona, the Korba platform? One of the early darlings of RPC. Yeah.
Indeed. So all that stuff. And I was reading books around then. That was great. But then I kind of stopped, basically. I had kids like in my 30s and kind of forgot about the career side of things, career progression, I guess. So then I thought, well, I don't know how I got into contact with it, with the idea of reading again, but I just started reading stuff and I couldn't stop. So I read great books like Accelerate, which had been knocking around for ages anyway, and I knew about continuous delivery. I kind of knew about, and DevOps was already kind of in my blood, right? So that was okay. But it was more the organizational side. And then I really got excited about a few things. I mean, I'd read The Mythical Man Month back at uni, and that really stuck in my head still, and it's still a great book to this day. And I'd seen that actually happening in the organizations around me, companies just hiring.
And I'd argue it's a fantastic book that way more engineers have read than managers.
Yeah, agree. Right. 100% agree.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like the next kind of sledgehammer blow to me was Conway's Law, right, which I hadn't heard of up until the point I think I probably read about it in Team Topologies. And Team Topologies was a real light bulb moment for me because it pulled so many things together. From Team Topologies, I read Drive from Daniel Pink about motivation, which was just fascinating and exciting.
Yeah, I've not read that. Good book, worth a read.
It's a brilliant book. Absolutely, yeah. It's a cornerstone.
We're going to have to get these. We're going to have to get these recommendations
we'll put them in the notes.
In the list.
Yep.
Yeah, put them in the show notes. It's a good reading list. I'd throw this in as well, actually, because if you like, just based on those list of books you've read, I'd throw this in. This is fantastic.
Okay, I should check that out.
By the Basecamp guys. Yeah, it's kind of a keep going. It's not about. Well, we can talk about that in another time. It's I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Cool. Yeah, so lots of books like that, and it kind of tied things together for me, especially Team Topologies because it does Conway's Law, it does motivation, so the stuff from Drive, it does team sizing, which is Dunbar's number, right? So the ultimate team sizes that you should do in an organization, and also the team shapes. Also, Matthew Skelton's work with DevOps topologies before Team Topologies, I think, is really crucial. Talking about team APIs, talking about Dev versus Ops, and where teams sit and stuff like that. And I'd seen all this stuff, right? And I'd lived this stuff, so that was like a light bulb.
Elegant Puzzle. I'll throw in while we're reading out Fantastic Engineering to Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson. That's like the kind of engineering, management, and leadership book to end all engineering and management leadership books. It's a fantastic read.
Yeah. So on the subject of leadership books as well. So one last one I would say is Turn the Ship Around by David L. Marquet, which is fantastic on servant leadership. And I think that was the one that really, I mean, all these books are great and they're heavy hitters. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. But then when I read Turn the Ship Around, I was like, oh, this is how I want to lead, right? Because this is probably what I've been doing on my whole career. It's by asking questions and pushing it down to the people who need to do it, kind of thing, rather than trying to do it myself. That was brilliant. However, despite all these great books and all this great reading, and I was kind of writing at the same time, I started a blog, I started a podcast, and I started working again. I started working again as an IC, although I did a bit of technical product management around that time as well. I thought, well, how can I kind of generate something? How can I contribute to this? Because I was making great connections. There's a conference called Fast Flow, which has been going now for a few years. And that was, it's like a Team Topologies conference. I went to the first one of those about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was superb. I met some really great people, really interesting people. Because one of the points of Team Topologies book is that it's around humane software engineering. And I thought, yeah, that's really what I want to kind of dig into. Despite all that, I was kind of like thinking, should I be a consultant? Should I talk about this stuff? What should I say? I couldn't really make any chocolate out of it, as they say in the Netherlands. So with that in mind, I just kind of like thought, right, yeah, where do I go? I read 2 more books, the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, and they completely blew me away. So like reading a novel about what we do day to day was like, oh my God, I feel so seen, because it looked like looking into our lives essentially, you know. So I love that idea. I read them and I read all these other books and I was like, right, what do I do? I think I need to write a novel basically, but not a novel which is a business book like the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project clearly are. They don't pretend to be anything other than a business book in a novel form. I wanted to write a novel about our business and make it kind of human, make it realistic, after a fashion, because it's supposed to be fun as well. So I also invented evil bosses and an evil AI plot and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's a bit of fun, but also hopefully with a serious message. And yeah, that in a very long way of going around it is how I came to write a novel about IT and software development.
And so what did you learn in the process? Because I'm interested in 2 things, both the content, which we can talk about, but also the process of doing it, and you know, any recommendations. A lot of engineers, I know a lot of engineers are up for writing something, be it fiction or non-fiction. A few people, a person who worked for me used to be she wrote science fiction or more fantasy, and they were great. And my old boss actually is being best-selling author as well, RJ Chowdhury, writing the detective series, which is great. So a lot of software engineers that I know, people in the business, are interested in doing this. How on earth do you get started? You know, what's the process? How does it work?
Best advice that I received was, I think it wasn't so much about writing itself, but it was more about how you kind of find your voice and how you get moving, was about, just writing. Just start writing, whatever it is, you know. So write something down in a notebook, write something down in a blog. I started with a blog. I'd blogged before, and I'd also worked as a journalist for a little bit of time, but those were just short articles. But I just needed to learn how to write again. So I just started writing anything that came into my head. I started off writing about automation and DevOps, and that moved into but there was some people stuff in there as well. And then when I discovered things around organisational design, Team Topologies, I got excited about that. So I think I started writing just because I had a lot of stuff that was built up over many years. And then when I started reading, that started to give me more ideas, which helped with the writing. So that combination of the 2 things really helped me form those thoughts. And they say that, that the writing is the one thing, but the real, I think Stephen King quote, right? It's about to write is, what is it? Something like to write is great, but to edit is divine. So you got to go back and start editing your work as well and start looking at it a bit more critically. What am I trying to actually say here? And that only really came to me after maybe a year or so of writing.
You remind me of that. Is it Hemingway? Had that Hemingway's 10 tips on writing, and he did this thing, which was he'd write 500 words in the morning. Oh no, sorry, he'd edit yesterday's 500 words in the morning and then write a new 500 words in the afternoon, and he got into this sort of TikTok discipline. And the other thing that I think is just a really good, I'm interested in what you think about this, really good advice to writing. It actually works for programming as well, I find, is, you know, when you get that thing, I don't know what to write, and then you're on a roll, right? And then you're writing, and then you finish the thing, like you finish a chapter or whatever, and then you come back and you sort of blocked again. What Hemingway did was he intentionally stopped halfway through a sentence, right? When he was writing new work, and so he would stop, walk away, and then come back the next day when he was doing it, and he would continue from that sentence, which I thought was a really interesting little hack. I have the same thing works with code sometimes. It's you sort of, if you can quiet your mind to leave the code, which I have real trouble doing. You know, if I go to bed without having solved a problem, I don't sleep. It's terrible. So I've turned it, so that doesn't quite work for code with me. But yeah, interesting idea. So process-wise, I think there's a good advice in there. Process-wise, tell us about the book. What did you learn from writing it, and what do you hope that people reading it would learn?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I didn't start off with the idea of making a grand sweeping comment, but I just felt there was a lot of words that needed to come out, right? And I kind of started writing as well. So I had some ideas for characters. I knew where I wanted to set it. That was important. I'd already had that in my mind for about 20 years or something, not really about this book, but about the setting. And that's where I'm from, in the southeast of the UK, around the Dover area. But I made it as slightly fantastical. I just changed it a bit. I changed a bit of history so that there's like an island where there isn't an island. And anyway, You'll see if you look at the book. So that was a bit of fun I had. I staffed it with way too many characters to begin with because I wanted to have like so it starts off with a developer, and she's she's a DevOps. It's in the middle of an incident in the middle of the night. She wakes up at the classic 3 a.m. or 3:27, and she has to go into that situation. And the second chapter is the arrival of a executive in the UK who's basically come to that company to sack a load of people. So there's the incident in the first chapter, and then there's the incident in the second chapter. And these two protagonists, they go through the story, basically working out what they need to get out of, how they need to get out of the situation. And yeah, I kind of basically just threw everything at this. There's like an AI there's data centers, there's globalization, there's 24/7, 365, always on software culture in a kind of a rebuttal to the Andreessen, what was it called? His manifesto for the software world, wasn't it? The kind of software is eating the world, that statement.
Software is eating the world. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Exactly. It's kind of
the exec. I don't want to give too much away. I want people to read the book and get it out. But the exec coming in and with an agenda to sack a bunch of people, I think that's. When did you write this?
When did I
write
write
the
this?
book?
We just finished.
So
I just published.
Over the last 2 years. So yeah, over the last 2 years,
Right.
I've just published it in
Yeah.
the last month.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of
okay.
right on the nose, because
Isn't it? It's
all the
very
stuff-
relatable to many people. Very relatable to
Yeah,
many people right now, I'd imagine.
Well, there's a quote on the cover that so Charles Humble did a review for me, and he said his quote was, "Could scarcely be more of the moment," right? And it's right there. And it's just the things that I wanted to talk about, in our world, because I've seen that all this great stuff has happened, right? All these great learnings that we've had, and we've got amazing technology these days. We've got AI, all this stuff that helps us. And yet I'm still kind of doing essentially the same job as I was doing 30 years ago, in lots of ways. It looks very similar. So we're really failing in some ways to make our jobs more fun, more approachable, more easier for ourselves, in some way. So there was a bit of that. I wanted to express that frustration too.
I was going to say, you've used the phrase a couple of times, humane software. So make it real for our listener. What does that mean? What does humane software mean?
Well, it's the way that we treat each other, right? It's the way that we interact with each other at work. And there's things that have changed over the last 30 years, right? Is that we do now have companies which are very aware of how people should interact, But fundamentally, we shouldn't expect companies to tell us how to interact. We should just know it from ourselves, from the way that we're brought up or the way that we live. We should come into work in a respectful way. And I've seen, I'm sure you guys have seen as well, that sometimes when the pressure's on, all this stuff goes out of the window, right? All pretense of all of the great DevOps or CI/CD or even the way that we treat each other can go out the window. People can shout at each other. People can get emotional. People can get upset. The phones are going. It's very stressful. And it's difficult to be able to stay in our world and to be level and to be respectful to people. So that's what I mean by humane, is to actually try and remember that we're just humans trying our best, day to day. And it can be very tough. I think that's related to potentially absolutely related to the experience that I've had in my life, but also lots of other people have had as well too in their software engineering journeys.
Do you think you need to have an engineering background to enjoy the book?
No, I've got my family have actually been very nice about it, and friends too. So, and they're not all software engineers. I think it gives them an insight into the life that we have as well, because you know what it's like. You talk to your family and friends about what we do, and everyone's like, well, I don't know. So I think particularly family have found that very interesting to have an insight and to see how challenging it can be. For engineers as well, I think it's kind of quite cathartic because they can finally read something which is kind of says it like it is, right? I'm not really shying away from how I've felt about things or how I've experienced things or how I see things. And for leaders, it's been really interesting. I've had quite a bit of feedback from leaders saying that they felt quite seen and they felt quite ashamed sometimes of the actions that they've had to take, or they've helped them reflect a little bit on what it means to be a leader, right, as well. So no, so far it's been really interesting getting feedback from quite a wide variety of people.
I assume some of your characters are inspired by some people that you've met along the way as well, which would have been a lot of fun to be able to morph them into fantasy characters.
Well, indeed. Yeah, I think the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project both do a great job of that kind of characterization as well. So I think I wanted to expand on that. And in some ways, I see my book as a kind of a darker, more real version of those books. It's with a bit of fun as well thrown in. It's important to mention that. But yeah, I mean, lots of interesting characters over many years for sure. But yeah, of course, the characters in the book are amalgams or envisionings. They're not real, but yeah, lots of fun to be able to understand and play with ideas there as well. I mean, I do go into some details around, there's an architect there, for example, and I've spoken to many architects over my life. I've never been an architect in inverted commas as a job title, but I think we all kind of understand that they are in a very difficult position, like we all are. They want to be able to be seen as well, and yet they're stuck sometimes with frameworks and with boxes and with lines, and sometimes they're not able to actually influence things in the way that they may like, in the same way that an engineer can't, or the same way that a manager can't, or a PO can't, or a scrum master can't. So yeah, I think it's lovely to be able to play with dialogue or play with characters and understand perspectives, basically.
I have a very dim view of architect as a role, but it's probably a topic for another podcast. I see architecture as a verb, not a noun. Architecture is something that software engineers do. It's not a job that someone should have and only do that thing, right? And just have a kind of a white coat on and be an architecture astronaut. I spent too much time in banks and seen how little effect people in those roles end up having.
And it's frustrating for them. However, the organization still insists on having enterprise architects, and for certain things, you can't do without them. But it's tough. Yeah.
In terms of the IC to manager leader role, it's actually one of the career paths, particularly in financial services. One of the career paths that is really open to you to grow, and for some value of grow, is I'm now going to move away from doing implementation of some kind. I'm going to move up to being an architect and get a pay rise with it. So the system in that world it's almost part of the system, right? That role. Well, in our conversation leading up to this, you mentioned something about organizational. You had some thoughts on organizational design and why it was a bit of a red herring when it came to humane culture. Can you talk us through your thinking there? Because I think that might be a not so much controversial point of view, but I think that might be surprising or counterintuitive to some people, because I think a lot of people in organizations go, okay, well, in order to fix this problem, what we need to do is restructure. We need to change the structure somehow. And in fact, you mentioned Team Topologies, which talks a lot about structure of teams and so on. So I'm just curious. Talk me through why organizational design is a red herring.
Well, it can be. I mean, I think maybe what we need to do is divorce the organizational design from the output or the effect or the outcome, right, that you're trying to achieve. There was a lot of talk around Conway's law and Team Topologies around the reverse Conway maneuver, which is like designing your organization in the way that you hope your architecture will be, basically, because Conway's law says the communication paths of an organization will map into the software that you build as an organization. So it's kind of like a kind of a shortcut to, we can change our architecture if we change our org. And I think that's kind of now becoming less popular as a way of looking at things. I've not seen it happen myself either. I've seen plenty of organizations take on microservice, for example, and say, well, we need to do everything microservices, and ending up with a big ball of mud like we do with a huge monolith, right, as well, the same thing. So I think it's more about, let's not use organizational redesign, or as they call it, like an agile transformation sometimes as well, to reboot our culture or to talk about how we should treat each other at work. Let's keep that at a personal level, or keep that as an interpersonal level or at a team level, a very low level, where we're just humans talking to each other, rather than try and do it from a top-down perspective. I think that's the danger that you can get into. And I've been a part of these digital transformations / agile transformations where I've been a coach coming in, a DevOps coach coming into an org and trying to roll it out across multiple hundreds of teams, and it doesn't deliver, from my perspective, the value that it costs, because it costs a hell of a lot, right? And also causes a lot of disruption too. So I think that's that's what I would throw out there, is that not necessarily, I think it's great that we talk about these things and we understand these things and we see the relationship potentially between our organization and our software and everything else. But in between that, we need to remember the human bit. And again, that's why I wrote the book, right, and made human right in the title, because that's the important bit.
You mentioned a couple of examples of companies, and I'll leave it up to you to name them or not. But I'm interested in what does good look like in your mind with this kind of stuff.
So in terms of organizational design or
just in general, like What are good examples of humane software in the wild that people could go and look at and draw some inspiration from?
Humane software, I don't know, because I don't call software human or humane. It's, I guess it's more around the process.
Cultures that
Yeah,
encourage this kind
cultures.
of behavior. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, that's that $64,000 question, right? I think that everyone's looking for culture. I mean, there's that great quote, was it culture eats something for breakfast? You know the one?
Yeah.
I
What
need
is
to look
that?
that one up. Culture eats something for breakfast.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker.
That's the classic quote that I've completely forgotten. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't really know what it means, to be honest, but it sounds really impressive. I think that's what I've seen a lot of presentations from a lot of consultants saying this is what we have to get right, our culture. And a lot of leaders say the same thing, right? We need to fix our culture, let's get our culture right. And it's ineffable. You can't really put your finger on what it is. It has to come from the people there. And like, for example, at a team level, you can have a great culture, you can have a great team that's working really well, and you know what it's like. One person can change, or one person can drop out, one person can come in, and the whole thing falls apart. It's kind of very difficult to put your fingers on. So I didn't really answer
Peter
your question, but I don't really have an answer to it, to be honest.
No, just to wrap that culture question and strategy question. It's Peter Drucker said, in a nutshell, no matter how great your business strategy is, your plan will fail without a company culture that encourages people to implement it. Which sounds pretty straightforward when you read it like that. But I've definitely seen situations where the culture is just actively working against any kind of strategic transformation at all. Yeah, I mean, it comes back
Indeed.
to it's basically a reframing of alignment. It's a reframing of the concept of alignment. Whatever the story that management and leadership are telling, if that's not aligned with how the people feel and the values they have and the jobs that they're doing, then you're going to have friction and it won't work.
Yeah, and I feel that's where you can influence it as an individual level, wherever you are in the organization. And I go back to servant leadership. I think that's important. And for anyone who's working in a team to see their role not as just I'm doing software today, or I'm building something, or I'm testing, or whatever, I'm putting something to prod. It's about how do I act around the team, around my organization? How can I give to that organization in a way that allows us to have a better culture? I think everyone's a part of it. Everyone can influence it. So yeah, rather than that top-down approach, do it from the bottom up, I think. But again, you can't tell people to do it. They've got to feel it. So again, then how do you make people feel it? And sometimes people aren't feeling it. They've got problems at home. They've got stress. They're ill. For many reasons, sometimes we don't turn up our best selves on a daily basis. So yeah, that's the kind of tension between the organization and the individual, right, as well. And something, again, which I think is fascinating, but ultimately I don't think we can solve through fine words or even talking about it for a long time.
What's the most surprising thing that comment you've had about the book?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I have to think about that. I think a couple of things. I feel that I was surprised that leaders, some of them were so shocked by it, and also quite pleased by that as well in a way. I think I landed, because I think my biggest worry that it was going to be boring and wouldn't connect with anybody. I'm also surprised how wide it's kind of landed as well. I really was just hoping to publish it on LeanPub and think that a load of geeks like myself would buy it because they'd be interested in what they've read in the Phoenix project. And it's actually, LeanPub is not really sold very well at all, but on like traditional platforms, it's doing okay, right? So I'm seeing a much wider uptake than I believe. So I think that's the human aspect rather than the software aspect, maybe. That's the thing that surprised me most.
Richard, in your book, at the beginning, like the preface, there was a quote that says, to enjoy a career in IT, you must either be comfortable being a loyal company person, a highly skilled, long-term contractor, or an inventive freelancer. None of these options are dishonorable, but working for corporations for a long time tends to make liars of us all. And I thought that was really interesting because I haven't heard that before. What do you mean by that? Because there must be a lot of people working in corporations that maybe can relate to that.
Yeah, I think those were the people I was trying to reach, I guess, as well. And I think that's something that I felt sometimes is that, yeah, obviously you don't go into your job like not liking it for a long time because that's not helpful for anybody. But sometimes we have to make compromises on how we feel and our passions maybe as well. And like, for example, when you move into a new role, like becoming a boss, becoming a manager, again, you need to look at it in a different way. So I think that's what I was trying to get at there, is that there are compromises that we have to make, and we have to lie to ourselves a little bit sometimes to be able to do that. So maybe that's as much as about confidence in your own abilities as it is about anything else. But yeah, interesting.
I like that. Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Obviously, AI is front and center. We're arguably at the precipice of an AI bubble bursting. Without giving anyone financial advice, I think it's pretty clear that it's overbought in the AI space at the moment, and there's going to be a bit of a correction soon. But I'm just curious. I have the same three questions I ask people about AI. So I'm interested in your views as someone who's worked in DevOps and someone who's written a book, right? So quite different disciplines managed and led as well. AI as a tool for augmenting the capabilities of humans. That's the first question. Just thoughts. The second one is more a product question. So how do you see AI as a product feature? Where does it work and not work? And then finally, the last kind of open the aperture question is what are your views on the disruptions that AI is going to produce?
Okay, so yeah, as a tool, AI has, as you say, potential, lots of potential, and it would be a shame if it disappeared now, which it won't. I'm pretty happy to say that it won't disappear, because it is useful. It's becoming more useful as well by the day, I would say, and better at what it's doing. Where I've seen it really effective is in, writing. To be honest, I don't write with it. I didn't write the book using it at all. However, what it can do, what it is great for, is summarising and maybe being a sparring partner. So I find it useful to be able to understand maybe what happens next when I'm thinking about something. What should I do in my own life? So I think from the way I use it on a day-to-day basis is more about kind of, okay, I'm making this career choice, or I've done this, or my CV needs updating. How can you help me? Something that I might have gone to a person with in the past. Likewise, I'd use it for like a gym routine, which is, and it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Or I would use it for trying to understand how I can fix something that's broken in my house. I was with a friend on his boat, and we were trying to get diesel bug out of his tank because it was his engine wasn't working anymore. And we had ChatGPT talking to us, basically talking us through what we were doing because we couldn't see. It was just talking to us from above. It was amazing, So use cases like that where there's a big body of knowledge already out there, and it's not at your fingertips, and you have to spend a lot of time correlating it or searching for it. It's brilliant at that. Where it really falls down, and this is what I find on a daily basis, is with providing specific answers to specific questions around how can I fix this code, particularly around config management in DevOps. And this is something that I've recently ranted about on LinkedIn and various other places, is that I fell into a rabbit hole the other day where I was trying to fix an Ansible script that was running in Packer to build an AMI in Amazon AWS, and it was just going into this complete rabbit hole where it was trying more and more convoluted solutions to a problem which was actually quite a simple fix in the end, and one of us humans found it. So that's where the danger is, and that kind of leads on, I guess, to the features, or the product side of things. And I think it's just been shoehorned into load. I mean, us techies, we get very excited about new stuff, and it's always like we have to shoehorn it into all the products, and that's turned a lot of us, I guess, off products which have just tended to do that. And I don't pay attention to any AI first products, I guess, because they seem to be quite thin, essential SaaS lights, which are just being rolled out there. And Google, for example, I use Google Drive and Google Workspaces, and they're pushing it the whole time, and I don't appreciate that. But when it works invisibly under the covers and it does something that I actually find useful, fine. I do find that the question about the reach of AI and how it's indexing stuff or how it's been built into models is almost a little bit moot now, because so much scraping has gone on already. You just have to assume that any IP that you create is going to end up in it for one way or other eventually. That's, from my perspective, isn't a terrible thing. However, it's not good that the creatives don't get paid for what they do. So there's still a lot of tension to work out. How can music creators, how can writers, how can artists still get paid when there's a tool doing that? Also, people who work in TV production and film production, of course, as well, because it's impacting them massively. So lots of questions over the product side.
What's the disruptive impact of these technologies? Not just generative AI, but AI in general.
Yeah, I think like with all of the big step changes, and I think I think a lot of people have accepted now that this is a step change in our way of working, in the same way that We saw the internet coming along in the first place in the same way that we saw the iPhone first appearing, and not in the same way that we heard about big data or IoT, that's for sure. This is much bigger than that. It's kind of seeping into everything we do, and it kind of, that's what happens, right? It kind of goes sideways and becomes everything we do. So I imagine that we'll see much better integration in a lot of application, a lot of hardware, which we're starting to see already, and just it will become a part of our working life. I mean, it really is for me a part of my working life every day now anyway, even though I don't use it for code, I don't use it for writing. Like I said, I use it for all the other bits and bobs that kind of fill in around that. And increasingly Apple and Google and everyone else are also trying to find that fit, right? Trying to find where it will work. And also a lot of startups are still there in that space, trying to find that fit and find the next killer application or the next killer device that will deliver it to us. I mean, there's a lot of Star Trek type pins I think Meta are looking at as well, that kind of stuff, which I guess is just a matter of time. But then if you look at our phones, which are kind of listening to us anyway most of the time, surely it's going to come through the phone. That's what I'm thinking.
What about from a career perspective for engineers? Do you think the future is bright for software engineers and those in that space?
Totally. Yeah. I don't have any worries on that perspective. My son has just finished a CS degree, despite me telling him to avoid the CS degree, not for any reason around career advice. I was just like, come on, do something that's not what I did, But anyway, he just did that. But I have no worries for his future, really, because he has good critical thinking. I discuss problems with him, and he's kind of, in a way, actually quite vehemently anti-AI, in a way that I'm not. I'm quite embracing of it. But I think for ourselves, I mean, I see the impact at work, and it's from my work, working in DevOps, particularly with the legacy systems and legacy code, then there is not a lot of impact it's making. It's maybe being able to write a Terraform script a bit more quickly or helping us out around the edges, but it's not really making big impacts. I do see bigger impacts when it comes to create greenfield stuff, right? New applications, creating new solutions as well. And I hear that a lot as well. I think if that's your ambition, if you want to work in new stuff, which a lot of engineers do, right? They want to build new stuff, then you can't avoid it, and it would behoove you to really become familiar with using the tools.
You made a really interesting comment there about your son, and that your son is in his 20s, presumably, if he's just graduated. Yeah. So my kids are 20 and 19, and they've just started university, second year and first year. And I did a guest lecture up in Nottingham at a uni, and what the professor was talking to me beforehand, and he made the comment that they were having real trouble with kids that age who have a real allergy to AI. And it was in a creative degree, it was a design degree, and he made a really interesting comment. His insight I found fascinating was that the kids didn't feel like they owned the outputs when they used Gen AI tools, which I found really interesting. And because from my point of view, I see a lot of, particularly in sort of design side of things, I don't see Gen AI as particularly different. Actually, let me preface this, notwithstanding the very serious IP issues and training issues and so on, which I completely agree with you on. But I don't see it that different to a Photoshop filter. Pre-Photoshop, graphic designers operated in a certain way. Post-Photoshop, they operate in a new way, and the tool there gives them leverage to do things. And Firefly in Photoshop is a whole bunch of properly authorized and trained content that allows certain kinds of filters, new generative AI filters to be applied. And for me, that doesn't feel that much different to what was there before. It's just a new tool, a very powerful tool with some pretty impressive capabilities. But it was really interesting. These kids they were doing some of the design courses, like photography and so on. They were very, very allergic to it and the reason they were allergic to it wasn't because they didn't understand it, but they just felt they didn't own it. And I thought, I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't heard anyone in my circles worrying about not owning the outputs, which was sort of interesting. So that the lesson that I've been trying to get into my two is that they're actually really lucky that they're right on the cusp of a change in the way we work. And so they need to do two things. They need to understand the new tool chain, but what's more important than understanding the new tool chain is understanding what are the things that are going to be the same in the future, the things that are not going to be AI'd away. And for example, continuing the theme of this episode, the ability to tell a good story. Because at the moment, the machines can really only tell other people's stories. They can't tell new stories. Okay, and so if you're in any sort of creative endeavor, then the story writing part of it, and I don't just mean the writing bit, but the ability to create new stories, that's actually going to be super valuable. You'll have a bunch of new tools that'll help you realize those stories, but you still, at least for today, you still need a human to tell net new stories. So it's interesting that your son had a similar allergy at the same age to it that these folks at the university did. What was his reason for being anti-AI?
It's because he's working with people, or has worked with people in the past who have used it, and it makes him not understand what's going on. So if you're working on a shared project and some people are using AI for their output or using generative AI to produce the code, and he's not, then it became pretty clear to him that some of the time they didn't understand what they'd done as well. That they weren't particularly skilled in that language, perhaps, and they couldn't explain to him why they'd done something in a certain way. So it was that human contact that he was missing with those. Yeah, so when you got a blended team, I think in a professional circumstance, that kind of stuff is table stakes, right? So you understand how we work here. When do we check in code? How do we check in code? What does our tooling look like, essentially? But also, do we use Copilot? Do we use Claude? Whatever. Do we use NCP? All of this stuff, you would agree. But when you're in a learning environment, I guess, and because it's the Wild West still, I mean, because a lot of universities don't really understand it. I saw an article the other day about, I think it was yesterday actually, around some students not very happy with their lecturers using AI to generate the slides, right? So it's kind of, lecturers don't know how to use it either. Education is increasingly under pressure. So in some ways, further education is at the sharp end right now of all of this struggle. We're kind of a little bit divorced in the professional world because we can pick and choose, and there will be some structure that we'll agree as a team or as an organization to put in place around some guardrails for it, essentially. But that doesn't happen in education as far as I can see right now.
There's a fantastic article called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier, Field Experimental Evidence of the Effects of AI on Knowledge Worker Productivity and Quality. And it's super interesting. It has two broad conclusions. One is that the frontier is not like a sort of generally applied frontier of where this stuff is applicable. In some places, it's very, very productive. In other spaces, it's actually net negative. And the ability to apply it differs wildly based on the experience of the user, which is it's sort of obvious in hindsight, right? But the idea that simply giving generative AI to anyone makes them into a superhero is not really true. There's very different effects on where you are in your career maturity, which is back to one of my sort of ideas about intelligence and wisdom being orthogonal. You can be as smart as you are when you're kind of as smart as you're ever going to be when you're born, right? But you gain wisdom over time, and it's the wisdom to know when not to use it or when to use it here, which is really, I think, really important in effectiveness. But I'll put that paper in the show notes from Harvard Business School. It was actually done by some folks at BCG where I used to work. So it's a good paper, worth a read.
Imagine it'd be very hard to resist using AI if you're at school now to help you with your homework or assignments. It must be very tempting to do, but I can see the benefit of not doing it.
One quick aside about the book, because I struggled myself to find an artist to be able to do the cover for the book. So I was really clear that I wanted to have a boat on there. It's kind of set near the sea, the book. So I ended up drawing it myself. I drew it in pen and ink, and I tried to get an artist to do it. I couldn't get anyone to do it the way I wanted it. In the end, I ran it through ChatGPT to create this cover. So it was a one-off.
The picture behind you, yeah.
The picture, this picture here. So it was a one-off transformation. I just dumped my pen and ink drawing into it and said, "Please make this look like a woodcut." And the first effort, it came out like that, which I was stunned by. So that's one way that you can use Gen AI as a filter, but I still feel massively guilty about it. In fact, to the point that I wrote a whole blog post about it. So I've got on my blog on the book website, there is a blog.
What did you feel guilty about? Why did you feel
felt guilty? Because I was very clear about the influences that I wanted to use. So I had a whole hat full of influences I wanted for the style of the book. So Ian Banks.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, so artists, right? So there was Ian Banks's books from the 80s, his black and white look. There were various other artists that I loved books from other people with similar styles. There were some particular artists that I was interested in using as well, and the woodcut thing too. So I'd created a brief already, which informed my hunt for an artist, but I couldn't find one. So I didn't use the brief in the same way, but I used the picture and a short prompt to be able to generate the output, but I still feel guilty about it. So as a consequence, you have to, if you use AI in any part of the generation of the book, you have to tell the publishers that that's been done. So I've put it, that says that in the book, that I've used it just for that image and also for the map inside.
I was going to say, I saw the
think
map as well. It looks the same. Yeah.
But we're at a really interesting point in, like, technology always leads law and regulation and governance. It's always the case, right? Law's defensive and technology is offensive. So it's always, offense always happens before defense. And I don't know where this lands. And one part of me, I look at some of, I won't name names, but certain organizations have done things and they've been found guilty in court for doing these things. And you look at it and you go, my God, this is just horrific, right? I mean, this is just pure stealing. And now you're special pleading and using vast amounts of VC money to choose my words carefully, to buy very expensive lawyers, let's just say that much, right? To get these sort of legislation passed. And the way it looks like it's proceeding, and whether or not this happens or not, but the way it looks like it's proceeding is that the interpretation of what's going on with training is that it is akin to reading as opposed to copying. Okay, the distinction being, if I take a photocopy of a thing, I'm violating your copyright. But if I read a thing, me as a human, I read a thing and then talk about it, that's not copyright. I'm not infringing your copyright because I'm reading it. And so the argument, the sort of the legal argument, legal technical argument is that I read the material and the output of that is the weights, and the weights are not a copy of the original material. Now, I'm not putting that up as my opinion. I'm just saying this is where it looks like the law's heading. And that doesn't feel quite right. Like
it's interesting though, because if you think about how I've approached my writing as well, I've done the same thing. Though I've read a lot of books, I've taken a lot of input, and I've thought about it, and I've weighted it in my head, and I've ended up writing a story about it. I mean, it hasn't come out in 5 minutes; it's come out in 2 years. But
you can see how the argument's being made, right? You can see how the argument's being made. Whereas, say, in contrast, let me present something that's a complete contrast to that. Ingesting all of Studio Ghibli's films and then being able to generate a picture of this in Studio Ghibli theme with no permission whatsoever from Studio Ghibli about that process, that feels in a different category. And Anthropic, so Meta lost the case because they did a whole bunch of ingestion of copyright material that was a bit problematic. They lost the case. Anthropic came to an agreement with a bunch of publishers about paying royalties and so on. So this is a minefield at the moment, and I don't know where this plays out. The only thing I can say with certainty, though, is that I would prefer if people thought about this in two layers. One is the capability of a large language model properly trained on appropriately authorized material that has a set of capabilities that are profoundly impactful to society. How you get that material for the training and who's paid for it and not paid for it and so on and authorized to use it, that is a different question. And we should ban or legislate the bottom layer because certain organizations are doing the top layer in a way that infringes people's copyright.
I'm conscious of time, and before we go too far down another AI rabbit hole, which is very easy to do, just want to, obviously say thank you so much, Richard, for joining us today and sharing some of your background and hearing about the book.
Just give us a quick readout. Where can we find you? Where's the book?
Yeah.
Just so people can hear it.
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active there. I'm also on the RAND Slack community, if you know that.
I do.
I'm also, the website is humansoftwarebook.com. That's where you can go to find out all about the book and order it from there. I also have a blog, which is linked from there too, richardwbown.com, where I write occasionally. And I'm thinking about rebooting my podcast. I have one called Loving Legacy, which is all about legacy systems and also how that relates to humans, strangely enough. But I'm thinking about rebooting that. So maybe check that out. It's still available.
We'll put all the information onto the website. Thanks again, Richard and Matt, for joining us this week. It's been really interesting, really insightful, and we look forward to seeing how things go with the book. Richard, appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Richard.